Hi guys, welcome back to Cryptid's Den. Some stories stay with us not because they're scary or strange, but because they remind us of something we've felt ourselves. Regret, guilt, that deep ache of wishing we could go back and do things differently. Tonight's tale touches on that, on the weight of choices and the quiet hope for redemption. If it speaks to you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let me know where you're watching from. And if you haven't yet, please subscribe and leave a comment. Your voice matters here. Now let's get into it. They say some things in the woods are better left buried. I learned that the hard way. It was winter 1987. I had returned to the cabin deep in Ironwood Ridge, same one where I lost my son in a hunting accident years before. I wasn't there for closure. I wasn't there to heal. I was there because I didn't know where else to carry the weight I lived with. The snow fell like ash. The cold seeped through every crack in the wood. But the silence, that was the real danger. One night, I heard it. A low groan beneath the earth, metal dragging across stone. I followed the sound, found a pit hidden under roots and frozen moss, and in it was something I can never unsee. It looked like Bigfoot, but it wasn't wild. Its eyes held pain, regret. It didn't growl, didn't lash out, just waited. So I pulled it out. No thanks, no attack. Just a quiet return into the woods. I thought that was the end. I thought I did something good. But the forest changed after that. Chirping stopped. Symbols made from broken branches appeared outside my cabin. 3 tall figures stood at the edge of the trees, watching, judging. One of them was the creature I freed. Turns out that hole wasn't a trap. It was a sentence. They never touched me, not once. But every night they circled. Every morning, something else was broken, gone. And then it left me food, water, as if it still remembered what I did. As if it couldn't decide if I was its savior or its second mistake. When the ranger finally found me, I didn't scream. I just said one thing. I opened that hole. I shouldn't have. Now, I'm back in town. But every winter morning outside my door, I still find them. Those large footprints, standing silent in the snow, and disappearing before dawn. They say when the forest goes quiet, it's not because nothing's there, but because something is watching. I used to think that was just mountain talk. You know, the kind of thing old-timers mutter when the fire's low and the wind starts howling outside. But that winter in Ironwood Ridge changed everything I thought I knew about silence. It came early that year. Snow in October. The kind of cold that slips under your coat, settles in your bones, and makes even the crows forget how to scream. The trees stood still like they were listening for something, and the lake froze thick before Halloween even had a chance to wake up the kids in town. That's when I came back. The cabin was still there, tucked between the pines where the ridge bends toward the lake. Hadn't been back in over a decade. Not since my boy. He and I built that place with our hands. Timber frame, tin roof, no running water, but plenty of heart in it. After he was gone, I couldn't bring myself to step foot near it. But something that year, it called me back. I told myself it was about getting out of town. Too many faces I didn't want to see. Too many that didn't look at me at all anymore. Truth is, I needed to feel something again. And sometimes the only way to feel alive is to sit close to the place where death once touched you. The air up there was different. Still. Not peaceful. Just still. No wind, no birds, no distant hum of life. Just the crunch of my boots on snow and the slow groan of the cabin door, warped from years of sun and rot. Inside, it smelled like ash and old pine. My hands remembered where everything was. I lit the stove, threw logs on the fire, watched the smoke curl like fingers reaching up for warmth. Then I opened the old cedar chest near the wall. The photo was still there. Edges curled, color faded. Him and me on the roof, hammers in hand, grinning like idiots. "We'll finish the roof together, Dad." he'd written on the back in thick black ink. I stared at it for a long time. Couldn't decide whether to laugh or cry. So I did both, quiet as I could. Next to the stove sat the thing I never finished carving. It was supposed to be a bear, or maybe a man. But the lines had twisted somewhere along the way, became something else. Something with long limbs, a sloping back, and a face I didn't recognize but couldn't forget. I never told anyone about it. Just left it there, half-shaped, gathering dust and silence. The snow kept falling that night, thick, relentless. I sat by the fire, wrapped in my coat, listening to the crackle of wood and the hush of a world gone white. And then I heard it. Not a howl, not a branch snapping under weight, just a breath. Low, deep, long. Like something exhaling after holding it in too long. And it wasn't from the trees. It wasn't from the wind. It came from below. My skin went tight. Every hair stood up like it had been yanked. I held my breath, leaned closer to the floorboards. Nothing. The silence came back, heavier than before. I told myself it was old pipes, or a trick of the fire in the chimney. But there weren't any pipes, and the fire was nearly out. I didn't sleep that night. Just sat there, staring into the embers, feeling like I was being watched. Not hunted, not stalked, just observed. Like whatever was out there, or under there, was waiting to see what I'd do. Morning didn't help. The sun rose pale and hollow, like it didn't want to disturb anything. The lake was frozen solid, the trees dusted with white. I stepped outside, boots crunching slow, deliberate. The kind of walk you do when you think maybe, just maybe, someone's behind you. No tracks, no sound, no sign of life. Just me, the cold, and the strange feeling that the forest had pulled its breath inward and was holding it. Back inside, I placed the photo on the table, set it right in front of the unfinished carving. The light from the window hit both just right. The boy I lost, the thing I never named, facing each other like they were part of the same memory or the same mistake. I didn't know what brought me back to that cabin. Not really. But in that moment, I started to wonder if it hadn't been me who came looking. Maybe it was something else that called me. Something buried, something old, and maybe it wanted to be seen again. But not yet. Not fully. Not until I was ready to open what I'd tried so hard to keep shut. The snow whispered all night after that. Every gust brushing against the cabin like fingers against skin. And I sat there, holding that piece of paper, reading his words again and again. "We'll finish the roof together, Dad," and thinking how wrong he'd been. We never finished anything. Not the roof, not the carving, not the goodbye. And now, something under my feet was breathing. Something that never learned how to say goodbye either. Something waiting for me to remember. I thought I came to find peace. But what I found was silence. And silence out here. It doesn't mean nothing's there. It started with a sound I didn't know how to name. Not wind, not ice cracking on the lake. It was long, stretched thin like a wire pulled too tight. Half howl, half metal dragging across metal. It came from the trees sometime near dawn. I was shaving kindling by the stove, and the blade stopped in my hand the second it reached my ears. Then it came again. Closer. I stepped out with the axe still in hand. The snow had thickened overnight, blanketing every path, but I could still make out prints. Faint at first, then more pronounced as I walked farther from the cabin. They weren't from any deer I'd ever seen. Longer, wider, deeper, and heavy. Whatever left them wasn't moving fast, but it moved with purpose. Straight line, no drag, no hesitation. The forest should have felt familiar. I hunted these woods with my father when I was 12. Chopped my first tree out here. Knew the lay of the ridge like the back of my hand. But something about that morning felt wrong. The trees stood farther apart than I remembered. The air felt tight, like being inside a sealed jar. Even the birds, gone. Then I saw it. A break in the pine line. Circular. Dead center. No undergrowth. No nests. The snow there had barely settled, like it refused to cover what lay beneath. And at the middle of that open space, camouflaged under layers of old wood, tangled vine, and thick moss, was a pit. I approached slow, the way you'd approach something not meant to be found. The covering was expertly done, like someone hadn't just tried to hide it, but make it part of the earth itself. I knelt and started pulling the vines apart. The bark crumbled like paper. The moss clung like skin. Beneath it all, planks of hand-split timber crossed over each other in a tight weave. My chest felt tight. That kind of tight that creeps in before your brain catches up. I pulled a few boards loose. They snapped with a brittle pop, releasing a breath of old, damp air from below. Then I saw eyes. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. They were deep-set, shadowed by earth and cold. But they blinked. Slowly. Like it hurt. I leaned closer. That breath I heard the night before. It was here. It hadn't been a trick. It hadn't come from the stove. It came from this. From him. I cleared more of the cover, hands shaking. That's when I saw the shape more clearly. Broad shoulders, matted, ash-colored fur, tangled with blood and dirt. Not fresh blood. Dried. Black. Like it had seeped out days ago and never stopped. One of its legs was twisted beneath it. A massive arm pinned between roots and a slab of stone. And rope. Real rope, thick and cured, wrapped around its torso and wrist. Handmade. Not factory stuff. This thing wasn't here by accident. It had been caught. But not by trap, by intent. I stood there frozen for I don't know how long. It didn't growl, didn't move, just watched me. Eyes not wild, not feral, just waiting. I should have run. Should have backed away. I'd seen enough in life to know when something didn't belong. But there was something in the way it looked at me. Not just pain, not just fear. It looked like guilt, like it was sorry to be seen. Then I noticed the markings near the pit. About 10 feet off, half buried in snow, was a short column of stone. Looked like it had been there a long time, worn smooth by time and weather. But carved into its face was a pattern, spiral-like, sharp edges, and below it, in deep gouged lines, a symbol I didn't recognize. Not English, not any language I'd seen in the war or in books. I brushed snow off the base. Another line was chiseled beneath the marking. Crude, but deliberate. Looked like a warning, or a name. It didn't spell out letters I knew, but my gut told me what it meant. Not a grave, a prison. The thing in the pit stirred. Just enough to let out a sound, barely audible. Not a growl. A sigh, deep and broken. I took a step back. My heart thundered in my ears, but my legs stayed locked. And then something broke inside me. I saw my son's face again. That day, on the roof. The last smile. The promise we made before the ladder slipped. Before I failed to catch him. "I'll finish it, Dad." But I never did. That morning, standing over a creature that had been tied down and left for dead, I felt it, what I had buried with that boy. Not grief, guilt. I looked at the rope, looked at the gash across its chest, looked at the way it didn't fight or snarl or bare its teeth. Just laid there, like it had already accepted whatever came next. I spoke out loud, didn't plan to, just did. I caged my son in a coffin of silence. I buried him in the walls I built. I kept living, but only halfway. If this thing is cursed, then maybe so am I. I stepped away from the pit. Didn't cover it again. Didn't take pictures, just left it open, exposed, like the wound I hadn't touched in years. Back at the cabin, I sat with the fire burning low. The photo still on the table, the carving still watching me from the corner. I didn't sleep. That sound, the breathing, it didn't follow me, because I think I had followed it. And now that it knew I'd seen it, I don't think it would stay silent much longer. The next morning I brought rope, and a ladder, and the old block and tackle I hadn't touched since I helped rebuild the church rafters back in '79. I didn't know what I was doing exactly. My hands moved like they were following orders I hadn't said out loud. I just knew I couldn't leave it down there. Not like that. Not after those eyes. There are certain looks a man doesn't forget. I'd seen it in combat, too. Men bleeding out, not begging for help, just asking not to be left alone. Snow crunched under my boots as I hauled everything to the pit. The forest didn't fight me. No wind, no birds. Just that strange quiet that had settled over everything, like the trees were watching but not interfering. The sky above was the same dull pewter it had been for days. Nothing moved but me. When I reached the hole, he was still there, lying the same way, trapped, not struggling, not trying to scare me off. He didn't even lift his head, but his eyes were open, watching, following every motion I made as I set the pulley on a high enough limb, hammering a stake into the frozen ground. My breath came heavy, not just from the labor, but from the weight of what I was about to do. First attempt, the line slipped. He tried to shift his weight to help, but his shoulder was pinned too hard under the stone. I heard the groan in his chest, a deep, muffled sound like something stuck between bone and memory. I reset the rope, adjusted the angles. My palms burned even through my gloves. The frost bit harder each minute. Second attempt, I nearly fell in myself. Lost footing. Ice gave under my boot. I grabbed the rim with one arm and cursed loud enough to wake the crows that weren't there. He moved again. Just a hand this time. Large, gnarled fingers reaching for the rope I'd tossed back down. I don't know why, but I froze. Watched him wrap his hand around the end of it, slow and deliberate. He wasn't trying to yank it or pull it from me. He held it like he understood, like we were working together. We tried again. This time it worked. Took nearly 3 hours. My back screamed. My arms locked up more than once. Blood from my cracked knuckles stained the rope, mixed with old dirt and frost. But inch by inch, he rose. I used every knot and hoist I knew. He didn't make a sound through most of it, just groaned once when I finally managed to wedge the stone aside and he shifted his own weight upward. When he cleared the rim, I stepped back, panting, legs trembling. He laid there for a second, half in the light, half in the shadows cast by the pines. His fur was darker up close. Not just gray, but streaked with ash, mud, blood, things I didn't want to guess at. His breath came ragged. I saw steam pouring from his mouth into the cold. Then he moved, one knee first, then the other. He rose slow, like something ancient waking from a dream that had gone on too long. His full height made my stomach twist, not because he threatened me, but because for the first time I felt small, not just in size, but in story. Like I was a minor detail in someone else's forgotten chapter. He looked at me, not like an animal, not like prey or threat, like a man would look at another man after being pulled from a wreck he didn't think he'd survive. No nod, no noise, no gratitude I could name, just recognition. Then he turned, walked into the trees without a sound. No limping, no stumbling, just gone. Didn't even look back. I stood there until my legs couldn't hold me anymore. The sky was darker than it should have been. Snow was falling again. Slow, lazy flakes like ash drifting from a far-off fire. I didn't know what I expected to feel. Relief, maybe. Pride. But all I felt was hollow. Not empty, just scraped out. I looked down at where he'd been. The snow around the edge of the pit had melted slightly from the body heat and effort. But one thing caught my eye. A pattern. Rocks, small, flat stones arranged in an X. Not natural, not accidental. Just there. I didn't put them there. He didn't have time to. But they were there all the same. I dropped to my knees beside them, my breath caught in my throat. Maybe it was a warning. Maybe a curse. Maybe just a marker, like a headstone for something that didn't stay buried. I whispered to no one, "You're free now." And in the cold that followed, I realized something else. I wasn't. I never had been. Not from the guilt. Not from the silence I carried. Not from the memory of my son's voice in the rafters. And for the first time since the funeral, I wept, not like a man mourning, but like a man confessing, because I hadn't freed that creature. I had freed something in myself, and I wasn't sure that was mercy at all. It didn't take long before I realized I hadn't walked away from anything. I'd opened something, like lifting the lid off a well that should have stayed sealed. The forest wasn't the same after I pulled him out. Neither was the cabin. Neither was I. 3 nights passed. On the first, I thought maybe I imagined it. The scrape of something brushing past the cabin wall. I stepped outside with my lantern, boots crunching the fresh snow, and saw nothing. But when I came back in, one of the cans from the shelf had fallen to the floor. Lid off, teeth marks. Not small ones, not any animal I knew, too wide, too blunt. I told myself it was a raccoon. The kind of lie a man tells when he doesn't want to sleep in fear. Second night, the woodpile had been torn apart, not scattered, not knocked over, torn, like something had sifted through it, left what it didn't want. A few cords missing, not enough to freeze me out, but enough to say, I've been here, enough to remind me this wasn't over. The snow around the pile was disturbed, but no tracks, no drag. Just a smooth circle around the base like something had hovered instead of walked. Then came the third. I woke to find the storage crate open. The thick wooden one with the latches I'd built myself, too heavy to lift unless you knew the angle. It had been opened clean, not forced, just unlatched. The food inside gone, not all of it, but certain things. Dried meat, tins of sardines, my last good coffee pack. Left behind? Crackers. Instant oats. A block of salt I'd forgotten was there, like someone had taken what they understood and ignored what they didn't. That's when I knew it wasn't over. I hadn't saved a life. I'd triggered something that had a life far beyond mine. I started looking closer. Around the cabin, near the trees, there were markings. Charcoal or burnt ash smeared on the bark. Not letters, not symbols from any book I'd read. Circles, X's, a kind of trident shape, always pointing toward the door, toward me. I didn't know if it was a warning or a promise. I hung a trap the next day. Just a simple log fall rig like my father taught me. Meant for a fox or coyote. Didn't expect it to catch anything. Just wanted to feel like I had some control. The next morning it was gone. Not sprung, gone. The whole thing, trigger stick, weight beam, the bait, vanished. In its place, arranged with eerie care, was a small pile of stones and a tuft of gray fur. The stones were shaped in a spiral. Perfect, deliberate, centered with a tiny black feather I knew didn't come from anything local. That night I stayed up by the fire, gun in my lap, door bolted, lamps low. The air was so still it made the flame stand straight up in the lantern. No flicker. Just still. Then I saw it. Through the window, across the clearing, half covered in shadow. A shape. Not moving, not breathing heavy, just there. Tall, still, facing the cabin, watching, not the one I freed. Bigger, broader. It didn't move toward me, didn't back away. It just stood. For hours, like a century. Like judgment. I didn't open the door. Didn't sleep. The fire burned down, and I let it. Cold crept through the boards. My fingers went numb, but I stayed there in that chair, staring at the figure until dawn. When the light came, it was gone. Not a sound, not a mark. But I knew it had been real. Later, I walked the perimeter again. Found more symbols. One carved into the stump out back. One painted in ash across the shed door. Another traced into the snow with such precision it looked branded. A message in a language I didn't speak, but I understood enough. I wasn't alone. Not anymore. I don't know what I thought would happen when I pulled him out of that hole. Maybe some part of me believed it'd be over, that I could walk back to town in the spring, tell no one, and carry the secret like a scar no one could see. But the forest doesn't forget. It doesn't forgive. It remembers everything, and whatever I'd set loose wasn't mine to release. That night, sitting by the fire again, I whispered to the shadows behind the window. My son used to look at me like that. Before the fall, before the silence between us got too wide, my voice cracked. He watched me like I was a stranger, Like I'd already left him, and maybe I did. Maybe I started disappearing long before he did. The flames hissed softly. Something brushed against the door. No knock, just presence. I didn't answer, because I finally understood. You don't get to choose who follows you back from the dark. You don't get to decide the cost of mercy. And sometimes, you don't get to leave the forest just because your legs carry you out. Sometimes the forest comes with you. Sometimes it never left. And in the stillness between the trees, something old was awake. Watching, waiting, counting the debt. And I was starting to realize, the one I saved might not be the one I should be afraid of. It's the ones who come looking for him. And I think they already had. I first saw them at dusk. The kind of dusk that doesn't fade gentle, but collapses all at once, like someone pulled the light out from under the sky. The snow had turned to ice earlier that day. Everything was harder, stiffer. The trees looked sharper somehow, like their branches could cut skin. I'd just finished boarding up the back window. Something had been clawing at the frame, just enough to splinter the wood but never break through. I thought I'd feel safer once it was sealed. I didn't. I was on the porch when I noticed the silence shift. Not end, not break, just tilt. There were 3 of them, not moving, not speaking, just standing at the edge of the tree line, exactly where the snow met the shadows. 2 were tall, straight like posts. The third, the one in the middle, stood differently. Shoulders hunched, arms longer. It was the one I pulled from the pit. I knew it the way you know your own reflection, even if it's in a broken mirror. I didn't move, didn't breathe too deep. The cold in the air was nothing compared to what rose inside me. They didn't flinch when the wind picked up. They didn't react when the last bit of sun slid behind the ridge. They just stood there, like 3 judges waiting to see if the condemned would confess. They didn't come closer. Didn't leave either. Just watched. I backed into the cabin, 1 step at a time. Shut the door, turned the lock, though I knew it wouldn't matter if they wanted in. I didn't draw the curtain. I needed to see them, needed to know if they were still there. I sat at the table with my hands gripping the edges, knuckles white, heartbeat so loud I swore it'd echo off the cabin walls. The fire crackled behind me but gave off no warmth. Every so often I'd glance out the window. Still 3, still silent, still unmoved. Then, without warning, they turned. All 3, same time, same pace, melted into the trees like fog through fingers. I thought maybe that was it. That maybe whatever had been watching decided I wasn't worth the trouble. I was wrong. That night they came closer. I woke to a thud against the cabin wall. Not a knock, not a bang, just a deep, deliberate hit, like something pressing its weight into the logs, testing the strength. I stayed in my cot, held my breath, waited. Then came the sounds, not growls, not screams. Something softer, wet breathing. Shuffling of something too big to be human and too quiet to be beast. I heard the porch creak, a sniff. The door latch shifted, not opened, just touched. And then silence again. When I finally dared to open the door in the morning, the snow was disturbed in patterns I couldn't explain. Not footprints, not tracks, swirls. Like something had walked in circles, intentionally, around the cabin, leaving designs instead of prints. Inside, things had moved. My lantern was now sitting on the floor beside the fireplace. The wick pulled out, laid gently in the ashtray. My gloves, which I'd left drying near the stove, were now folded neatly and placed on my cot. But the most disturbing thing was the bird. A blackbird, dead, hung upside down from the rafters by its feet, tied with some kind of vine or root. Feathers singed at the edges. It hadn't frozen to death. It had been displayed, like a symbol, a warning, or maybe a message I was too ignorant to understand. I went outside, walked the perimeter. The same 3 spirals were etched into the snow in different spots, always facing the cabin. 1 on the west side, 1 in front of the well, 1 directly in front of the window where I'd seen them first. My heart thudded in time with my boots. When I got back to the truck, my stomach dropped. The tires were shredded. Not slashed, ripped, clean through, like claws had torn through rubber and steel like paper. The snow inside the wheel wells was red. Not blood, just red dust, like clay or soil from somewhere else. I stood there for a long time, hand still on the side mirror, breath clouding the air. No way out now. I wasn't just isolated. I was chosen. Back inside, I checked every corner of the cabin, every drawer, every crack in the wall. Nothing taken, nothing added, except for one more thing. On the windowsill, scratched into the wood with something sharp and steady, were 4 vertical lines, and 1 diagonal slash across them. 5. Like someone was counting, like someone was waiting for the next. I didn't leave the fire that night. Sat up with my back to the stone hearth, shotgun beside me, lamp burning low. The wind howled through the trees, but I could hear them underneath it. Soft steps, deliberate breathing, that low-frequency hum you don't hear with your ears but feel in your teeth. I stared at the carving above the mantel, the one I'd left unfinished, and I finally understood why I stopped halfway. Because some part of me already knew what I was carving. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a man. It was what I saw that night. Long arms, bent knees, eyes that didn't glow, but reflected something back at you didn't want to face. I whispered to the room, "I saved you because I thought I was doing the right thing." The shadows didn't answer, but I felt something shift. Not forgiveness, not peace, just a presence settling in deeper. And I think it was then I realized, you don't save a thing like that. You set it free, and then it judges you for it. I don't know when the cabin stopped being mine. Maybe it was when the windows started frosting from the inside. Maybe it was the first night I found claw marks under the bed. Maybe it was the day I realized I hadn't spoken out loud to anything human in over a week. But I felt it. One day I was living here, surviving through the cold. The next, I was being held here. Not by force, by presence, by the way the wind moved differently through the trees, by the way the forest watched without blinking, without breathing, waiting for me to break. The latches were still on the door. The fire still burned, barely. I had 1 can of beans left, water from melted snow. Enough to last maybe 3 more days if I stretched it thin and didn't think too hard about what hunger feels like in the dark. But I didn't leave. Couldn't. Every time I even stepped out past the porch, it was like the woods leaned in closer. I could feel them at the edge of every breath, like a circle had been drawn in the dirt, and I wasn't meant to step beyond it. At night they circled. I could hear the steps. Not fast, not charging, just slow, deliberate. Every so often they'd stop, like they were waiting for me to speak. I never did. The quiet was so heavy it pressed into my chest, like the logs in the wall were leaning in to listen. The fire would crackle, then die down, and the wind would slip through every nail hole and loose board, but none of it covered the sound of something breathing just outside the walls. They never entered. Not once. But they didn't need to, because what they were doing wasn't hunting. It was judging. Every breath I took, every crack of the wood floor under my boots, every word I muttered to the empty air felt measured, weighed, recorded. I started whispering without realizing. Not prayers, not thoughts, just little confessions. I could have made him wear the harness that day on the roof. I saw the loose rung before he climbed. I thought he needed to prove something. Every night the voices in my head got louder, but the forest stayed silent. Until the day I left the cabin. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I just couldn't take the walls anymore. Maybe I wanted to be seen again, even if only by what lived in the trees. Maybe I thought if I walked out into it, into whatever this trial was, they'd finally tell me what the sentence was. I followed the ridge, snow up to my knees, wind so cold it cracked the skin inside my nose. My boots were soaked before I'd made it 100 feet. I kept walking, my legs went numb, my ears rang, and then I saw it, just beyond the broken pines, half buried under a drift. A cave. I don't remember it being there when I was a boy. Or maybe it was, and we were taught not to notice. Either way, it called to me. I climbed down the rocks, slipped twice, once hard enough to bruise my ribs. But I got there. Ducking under the narrow lip of stone, I stepped into the dark with nothing but a half-dead flashlight and a gut full of fear. It smelled old inside. Old in the way books do when they've been sealed for too long. Damp, still, but not dead. The light bounced off the walls, cracked rock, roots, mineral stains. Then something else. Marks, deep into the stone, not carved with steel. Scraped, etched. Hundreds of lines forming symbols I didn't understand but felt all the same. A spiral, a jaw, something that looked like a man, but taller, arms too long, back hunched like he carried too many winters. I kept walking. The back of the cave opened up wider, and there, against the far wall, stood a massive slab of stone, half fallen, but still upright. Carved into it were scenes, figures chasing animals, others dragging one of their own, ropes around its wrists, dark shapes circling with eyes the size of fists. A story. Punishment. I reached out and touched the cold rock. It burned. Not heat, not pain, just something deeper, like recognition. The one I freed, he had been put there by his own. Not because we feared him. Because they did. Not because he was less. Because he had broken something sacred. The thought hit me like a hammer to the spine. He wasn't some victim. He wasn't some lost soul. He had been exiled, bound, buried, not by humans, not by hunters, but by his own blood. For what? I didn't know, and I didn't want to. I stumbled out of that cave with less than I walked in with. And when I made it back to the cabin, barely standing, soaked to the bone, coughing blood into my scarf, I found the door cracked open. I didn't leave it that way. Inside, the fire was dead. But something was on the table. A pouch, handmade, woven from moss and sinew. Inside, roots, fungi, a small stone flask. Water, I guessed. Food. Sustenance. Not enough to feast. Just enough to survive. I looked to the window. No one. Not the one I freed. Not the ones who watched. Just a trace of heat on the glass, like breath had touched it and faded. I sat down, shivering, ate slowly, cried harder, because I understood. They hadn't come to kill me. Not yet. They had come to show me who I was. Not a rescuer. Not a victim. A witness to a judgment older than mine. And I was still alive, not because I'd been forgiven, but because someone had to remember. The storm came fast, not like the others. Not slow, creeping in from the hills. This one hit like a wall. 1 minute I was gathering kindling. The next I couldn't see 10 feet past my hand. The snow didn't fall. It poured sideways. Wind howled so loud it drowned out every thought I tried to hold on to. The sky went gray, then black, and then it was like the forest disappeared completely. Just white and wind and nothing else. I slammed the cabin door shut, braced it with my shoulder, shoved the bolt in deep. I was alone, again. Alone with that silence that somehow stayed even louder than the storm. And then I heard him, my son, or the voice I remembered as his, faint, distant, coming from the trees. Dad! I froze. Every hair on my arms stood straight up. That voice didn't belong in the storm. It didn't belong in the now. It belonged on the roof of a half-built cabin, 20 feet in the air, with a smile full of sawdust and trust. And still, it was there. I opened the door. Didn't mean to. Didn't think. My hand just moved. Snow slammed into me like a punch, stole the breath out of my lungs. The cold burned my eyes. But I heard it again, closer. Dad, I need you. I stepped out. The world vanished behind me. The cabin, the porch, the firelight, all swallowed whole. I moved forward, feet sinking deep. Snow up to my thighs, my coat ripped on a branch I never saw. Ice filled my boots, but I followed. That voice led me, one word at a time, deeper into the white, until I saw him, just a shape at first, standing still in a small clearing. A boy, about the height he was when he fell, arms at his side, head tilted, hair stiff with frost. No tracks led to where he stood. No breath came from his lips. He turned toward me, and I stepped forward. The ground disappeared. My legs dropped out from under me. A ledge I hadn't seen gave way, and I fell hard, rolled, slammed into a tree trunk. Pain shot through my shoulder and ribs. I laid there in the snow. Wind knocked out of me, blinking up into a sky I couldn't see. That's when the dark shape appeared over me. I couldn't move, couldn't lift my arms, just stared. It was massive, covered in snow and fur, muscles rippling beneath skin I couldn't name. Its eyes looked down at me. Tired, maybe. Not cruel, not kind, just resigned. It bent down, lifted me like I weighed nothing. Its arms wrapped around my chest, and my head slumped against its collarbone. The fur was warm, wet, smelled like dirt and stone, and something older than time. It didn't make a sound. Just walked, through storm, through snow, one step at a time. Like it knew the way without ever having to look. I must have passed out, because when I woke I was back in the cabin, laid out on my cot, fire blazing. Snow melted off my boots. My coat hung near the stove, steaming. The pouch of roots and water I'd been rationing was full again, and the door, locked from the inside. I sat up slow. My body ached, but I wasn't broken. My arm worked. My lungs held breath. Outside, the storm had calmed. I looked out the window and saw them. Not the creatures, just tracks. Huge, deep, starting in the woods, leading straight to the porch, and stopping at the threshold. No return path, just one direction, like something had delivered me, and vanished. I stepped out, just enough to let the air hit my face, and I saw the lake. Frozen still, but not silent. Cracks had formed, thin lines snaking across the surface like veins in old hands. And in the middle, something had melted through. Steam rose faintly, a shape I couldn't quite make out beneath the ice. Then I heard the voice. This time, it wasn't my son. It was real. A man from behind me. You made it. I turned. A forest ranger, tall, snow-dusted, face rough with windburn and time. Storm almost buried your place, he said, stepping up. Hadn't seen prints out here in weeks. Figured it was another cold case. Then saw your firelight. I just nodded. Didn't speak. He looked past me toward the trees. This forest, it picks people. Every 20 years or so. Always someone who's lost. Always someone who walks in and forgets to walk out. I tried to find words, couldn't. He stepped closer. But you got brought back. He didn't wait for a reply. Just handed me a thermos and walked back toward the trail he came from. I sat on the steps, watching the trees. Something was different now. The forest wasn't pushing me out anymore. It wasn't holding me either. It just was. And me? I looked down at my hands, calloused, scarred, still shaking. Still here, I whispered to myself. Maybe to the snow, maybe to the one who carried me. I broke something once. I thought I could fix it with nails and wood and silence. I looked back at the cabin, smoke curling from the chimney. But not all mercy is redemption. Some is just a mirror. And I think, for the first time since the roof gave way under my son's feet, I knew what it meant to fall and not be punished. To be carried, not because I was worthy, but because I was still learning what it meant to stand again. And somewhere in that frozen quiet, between the trees that remember everything, I felt something watching. Not with hate, not even with forgiveness, just with memory. Like it had seen this story before, and was waiting to see how it ended. I left the ridge in early spring. Didn't tell anyone why. Didn't tell them what happened. The ranger who found me assumed I'd gotten disoriented. Maybe had a minor stroke or hypothermia-induced hallucination. He said I was lucky. I didn't argue. I packed light. The woods didn't want much from me anymore, and I didn't want to bring any of it with me. Left behind the old rifle, the cot, the snow-soaked journals. Just carried one thing down with me. What was left of the carving. Not finished, but changed, like me. Back in town, nobody asked the right questions. Nobody looked long enough to see what had followed me home. You live alone long enough and folks stop expecting much from you. I used that silence like a shield. Grew a beard. Bought some groceries. Kept to the edge of town like I always had. But I didn't forget. Every morning I sat by the same window. Not to watch birds. Not for the view. But for the patch of frost that always settled in the same spot, whether it was 20 degrees or 70. A shape. Like a footprint. But broader. Deeper. One that pressed itself into the snow behind my shed without ever leaving a trail to it. Some mornings it was there. Some it wasn't. But when it was, I felt it before I even opened the blinds. I started carving again, this time slower. Not with a plan. I didn't force it to be a man. Didn't shape it to look like a beast. I let the grain tell me what it wanted to be. Something in between. Something that wasn't asking to be understood. Just seen. It had eyes that didn't judge. Shoulders that bent under invisible weight. One hand reaching forward. The other clenched around nothing. A figure that wasn't attacking or surrendering. Just standing. Between two trees. Between two worlds. When I finished, I didn't sign it. Didn't even sand it smooth. I left the edges rough. Let the wood splinter where it wanted to, because some things aren't meant to be polished. I brought it to the chapel at the edge of town. Quiet little place where the stained glass was more dust than color. Told the reverend I'd made something. Asked if they'd hang it. He looked at the piece for a long time. Didn't ask what it was. Didn't ask why. Just nodded and said, "It watches." I didn't correct him. They hung it near the back, above the old pews no one sits in anymore. A place where light barely touches, even when the sun's high. The figure looked out over empty rows like it had always belonged there. People started to notice, not all at once, but some. A kid sat under it once during a funeral. Said he felt warm there, even when everyone else was cold. A woman came in after losing her husband. Said she didn't believe in God anymore, but she sat there, and for some reason she wept. Not out of grief, out of release. No one could explain it. They just called it the Watcher. Never named it more than that. Didn't need to. The truth was, neither did I. Some mornings I stood in front of it myself, hands in my pockets, hat low over my brow, just watching it watch me. Like it remembered. Like it was saying, "You're still here." That matters, because not everything that watches is a threat. Some things watch because they were once caged too. Some cages don't have bars or locks. Some are made of memory, of guilt, of silence we pretend is strength. I never told anyone what I did up there. Never explained what I saw. Not because I was scared they wouldn't believe me, but because it wasn't meant to be believed. It was meant to be carried. So I carried it, in the frost on my window, in the ache in my bones when the wind changes, in the shape of a thing half finished, standing between two worlds, watching. And in the last photo I ever took, weeks before I went into the hospital, a shot of my backyard after the first spring snow. Ordinary. Still. But in the left corner, barely visible behind the old pine, there's a figure. Not clear, not close, just tall, shadowed, watching. And somehow, I know it isn't over. I just know it's not done with me yet. There are places in this world where silence is more than absence, where it becomes a presence of its own. It fills the trees, settles in the snow, and lingers in the spaces between breath and memory. In those places, time doesn't pass the same way. The past isn't behind you, it walks beside you. And some truths can only be heard when everything else has gone quiet. Sometimes what we fear isn't what's out there. It's what we carry. The wounds we bury, the guilt we feed, the love we were too late to speak aloud. We build cages for ourselves with these things, invisible ones, and we tell ourselves we're strong for surviving inside them. But there comes a moment, maybe just once in a lifetime, when something from the outside reaches in. Something ancient, unspoken, something that doesn't ask if we're ready. It just shows up. It stares through us. It holds up a mirror and waits. That moment, right there, is where the stories split. Some run. Some pretend it never happened. But a few, a rare few, stop. Listen. and let themselves feel the weight of everything they've tried so hard to forget. Because there is a law older than the ones we write in books. A law that lives in the quiet, in the snow, in the cracks of our regrets. It doesn't punish, it doesn't save, it only reveals. It says, what you free you answer to, and in answering, sometimes healing begins. Not with loud redemption, not with perfect closure, just with a slow thaw, a breath returned, a silence shared instead of suffered. So if something ever finds you in the dark, not to harm you but to remind you, you are not alone. Not really, not forever. Then maybe, don't run. Maybe stay. Maybe remember. Thank you for walking with us through the cold, the shadow, and the memory. If this story touched something in you, if it made you feel seen, or still, or a little less alone, we invite you to share your thoughts below. And if you'd like to join us for more stories like this, ones that echo in the quiet long after they're told, please consider subscribing, following, and being part of this space where the unseen is remembered. We're grateful you were here. See you in the stillness.